Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Vegan Spirituality Online Gathering. My name's Lisa Levinson, and I'm one of the hosts of this gathering, and our purpose is to gather together to explore veganism as a spiritual practice. And we do this every month online and also in person. There are groups around the country that are vegan spirituality groups, and they gather together uh, they share food together, they do events, they have speakers, and really practice veganism as a spiritual endeavor together and explore new traditions and co-create new rituals. And that's what we're about. We also have a very strong interfaith vegan group, an interfaith vegan coalition that we're involved with, and so we really welcome people of all faiths into our group so that we can advocate for veganism in, on all paths. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We're just delighted to have everyone here. And this month is Activist Appreciation Month, so we're here to appreciate your efforts to help the animals. If you want to know more about that, the website for that is idausa.org/activist month. So it's throughout the month of February. We do this every year. And Jess, who is our special guest today, is part of the program of events for Activist Month. So I am the Sustainable Activism Campaign Director for In Defense of Animals, and it's through IDA that we offer this program to support you through emotional and spiritual resources. So I'd like to introduce my co-host, Judy Carmen. She is the author of a wonderful book called Peace to All Beings. Judy?
Hi everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. Let's maybe just take a moment before we get started and send out our Valentine love to all the animals in the world. Just feel that love that we have and all the extra love that's floating around the planet today, and send it to the animals. All right, thanks. And now I want to introduce Jess Ang, that's spelled A-N-G, and she has provided intuitive consultations and readings to people all around the world. She's also volunteered as a mentor to help people transition to a vegan lifestyle. And her articles on vegan advocacy have been published by the animal rights organization In Defense of Animals and Vegan Education Association, which is in Sydney. And her aim is to continue following her intuition as best she can and to empower others to act on their spiritual and intuitive guidance as well. Her website is Jess, and that's Jess, Ang, A-N-G, intuitive.com. And I think Lisa could maybe put that in the chat box so that everybody could see that. So Jess, let's start out by having us tell us your vegan story. What happened in your life that encouraged you to go vegan?
Well, for me, it wasn't actually one thing. It was more like a process over a number of years. I would say the seeds were planted back at school. So I remember around 12, 13, some of my friends became vegetarian. And at the time, it was the first time I'd ever been questioned on the ethics of eating meat. And I just thought it was such a normal thing, though. Like, it was everywhere. My parents, I thought they were good people. They were feeding me meat. The doctors were recommending it. Teachers were. So I was introduced to it back then. But a few years later, I came across a book called Are You Confused?, which was in my parents' bookshelf, and it was all about how to navigate the information out there about the conflicting advice around nutrition and what's good for us in our bodies. And it got me thinking about things like, where's the advice coming from? Is it backed by research? Who funded the research? All those things. And it was ironic because it was from my parents' bookshelf, and they were not at all happy when I announced that I wanted to be vegetarian. But it was later on, around 18, 19, I was practicing Aikido at the time, and it's a Japanese martial art. It was in the change rooms I got talking with another woman who was working for animal liberation. and I mentioned I was vegetarian, and for the first time I received a positive response about it. I remember her saying, "Good on you." She was a strict vegan. She said it with pride, which was interesting for me because I'd always been very apologetic, like, "I'm sorry, I'm vegetarian." But yeah, she started leaving magazines for me in the change room because we didn't always have the same classes, and the magazine was called Vegan Voice. And I remember reading those articles and something really resonated with me. And I wanted to be vegan even back then, but my fear was around social consequences because already I found it challenging being vegetarian and the disapproval around that. But eventually in 2009, I did the 30-day vegan challenge run by Animal Liberation Victoria in Australia. And after that, there was a list of recommended resources. I can't remember his name, but it was a bodybuilder, I think, who said, "Watch Earthlings if you're not vegan or wanting to make a decision." So I was all enthusiastic and gung-ho. I ordered the DVD, I was ordering books. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I often, people have asked me in the past, "Why are you vegan?" And I say it's because I watched Earthlings. But the truth is it was the trailer to Earthlings. So I clicked on that trailer and it was just, I found it horrific. Like just short snippets from the documentary, but enough violence towards animals that I was really upset. I remember bawling through the whole thing. I was crying afterwards, and I had this kind of awakening that if vegan was something I wanted to be, it just seemed petty and trivial to not do it because I was worried what people would think of me. So I made the choice to go vegan, and it was true. Not everyone was happy about that decision, but I'm so glad in hindsight I did it. And yeah, it brings me a lot of joy now. So that's kind of my story of how I became vegan.
Oh, thanks, Jess. Wow, what a story. And yeah, Earthlings is something else. It really is a
Mm,
powerful,
yeah.
powerful film.
Mm,
And makes you cry no matter what.
yeah. Yeah.
So then the other part of what you're doing is this intuitive counseling. So what led you to develop your intuitive abilities and then provide intuitive consultation? How did that come into your life?
Again, I think it stemmed back from childhood and that bookshelf of my parents. So it was like a little library at home. So they had lots of books on different spiritual practices. My parents are quite spiritual, so my dad's a devout Buddhist. My mum describes herself as a lapsed Catholic because she was baptized and stopped going to church, but she's still one of the most spiritual women I know. Um, and yeah, so I got to read about meditation, different religions. I think there were New Agey books in there. My dad taught me to meditate from a young age. So I found that my intuition started to get better over time. I think because of that, it was never my aim. And I think we've all had those moments where we just know something. We don't know how we know, but we know, like we know what's about to happen, or we know what action to take. And that became more frequent for me to the point where I was getting very clear answers sometimes. Um, Sometimes the words would come through clearly. It wasn't like hearing a physical voice, but in the end, I started referring to it as voice, which probably sounds nuts, but as a kid, I'm like, I feel like voice is saying this or voice. And people around me started asking for advice, like, what does voice think about this or that? And it just seemed to be always accurate. And so from a young age, I was giving advice using my intuitive ability. I never dreamed I would do it professionally for complete strangers. But it got to the point where I say that my intuition was getting stronger, but I often ignored it. Like I wouldn't follow it because I have a strong logical side to me as well. And if it clashed with my logic, I wouldn't follow my intuition. So I had a lot of opportunity to see how things would crash and burn if I didn't follow it, what would go wrong. So I think around 2012, I made the decision I'm going to follow my intuition no matter what. And just for little things at first, like trivial decisions, what to eat for dinner, where to go. It was very little things. And then it got to the point where it wasn't like a little nudge anymore. It was like my intuition was screaming at me to do this particular professional intuitive training. And it was overseas. It was at the time I'd never been on an aeroplane by myself before. I'd been in the same job for over 5 years, the same home for a long time. I'd been very sheltered in my comfort zone. So this was way outside my comfort zone, but I quit my job. I bought a ticket to the US where I did the training, and yeah, I had to do readings for complete strangers while being watched by my trainer. It was very nerve-wracking, but it was fun as well, and I got good feedback. I realised I could do it. I came back to Australia and did a lot of practice readings to make sure it was a consistent thing I could do for people before I offered it professionally. So yeah, it really goes back to I think that spiritual practice and meditation, and it led me on a journey that I had no idea I would go on, but I'm very grateful for. But yeah, so it started back then from that bookshop.
Well, thanks, Jess. Yeah, I had to get my audio back on there.
Okay.
So that's absolutely fascinating. So your work of empowering people to act on their spiritual guidance is definitely of a great interest to all of us. Please tell us more how you help others to do this, and especially animal activists. How could it help us?
Yeah, well, I guess there are two aspects to that question. So the first one about how I help. So I do write about it. So I write monthly articles. I've been doing that for about 5 years. So often it will touch on the topic of intuition, how to access it ourselves. Not always specifically in the area of activism, but just generally. And I also offer one-on-one consultations. So that actually happened because a couple of years ago I sent out a survey about what people liked around the readings, what could be improved, what services they wanted, what was going on. And the responses I got, no one wanted me to change anything, but there was this common thread where people were saying they wanted to learn how to receive answers themselves. They felt like it'd be good to have extra clarity in their life and to just strengthen their intuition. So it got me thinking. I wondered, what if I invited people through the same process that I go through each reading? So opening up the chakras, visualizing, going above the head, connecting to any spiritual presences. So I did that. I offered a free trial because I wasn't sure how it would turn out. And so instead of using my intuitive ability to offer answers or guidance, I was using it more to tune into to other people and how they could receive answers for themselves. Or if there was an answer I felt was coming up, did it resonate with them? Getting to a space where they felt they could feel the truth for it themselves or not. And the feedback I got afterwards was really positive, and I noticed that these people seem to make changes more quickly and more powerfully than a standard reading, which in hindsight kind of makes sense because they felt for themselves what they needed to do. It wasn't just an answer given from a reader, you know. So after that, I decided to add that service on my website. And in the end, I replaced the old readings with this because I feel like it's of value. In terms of using intuition for activism, I think it goes back to that idea of just listening for answers, listening to what do I do next? Because there's a real risk of burnout with this kind of thing. I think, you know, like I know when I first became vegan, I felt like all this stuff was going on, this terrible violence towards animals all over the world. If enough people know, it will stop, and this sense that, you know, it has to stop. And I think a lot of us come to that sad realization that's not as simple as that, you know, so not everyone wants to hear about that information. And of the people who do hear it, not everyone's ready to change. And I'm kind of not in a position to judge because I know I was that person many years ago when I first saw the Vegan Voice magazines. I knew about it, but I wasn't ready to change because of the fear of social consequences. So I'm not proud to admit that, but I think it's very normal. Again, back at school, feeling like this is a normal thing. So I think activists, when they come to the realization that, wow, this is so ingrained, it's so socially acceptable, we can't change anything, it can lead to a sense of hopelessness, which isn't, you know, it doesn't help us be more effective. And so intuition leads us to go where we need to go, what conversations we need to have. I guess to share a story, when I first became vegan, within a year or so, I felt passionate about it. I wanted to go out there and, you know, I wanted to quit everything else, just, you know, live off my savings, help the animals, protest, all of that. And my intuition strongly said no to that, which was confusing because I felt like this is my passion, this is what my heart's saying. And in hindsight, I think I was still kind of traumatized by what I'd seen. Probably had a bit of an angry energy about me, and people don't want to be around that. It's not as effective as if you're coming from kind of a healthier space. It's understandable that you would feel that way, but I'm glad I followed my intuition there. Years later, I got the ping to kind of volunteer for a local vegan club, and it's ironic. It was like the opposite scenario to what I first had. It was like I felt like I didn't have time anymore. I didn't have time to volunteer, but my intuition said do it. So I volunteered just to be a mentor for people who wanted to be vegan. And the founder of the club contacted me and said, from your CV, it looks like you might want to write articles and would you be interested in that? And I actually wasn't really, but again, my intuition said do it. So I followed my intuition. I didn't know what to write about. I tuned in similar to like I would in a reading, and I got the answer trauma. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I wrote an article on trauma, how to cope with trauma related to witnessing animal cruelty. And apparently it had a huge impact. So within hours of that being posted, I was sent a link, and he said you might want to look at the comments. And I was surprised. Actually, that's how Lisa found me through this article. And looking at the comments and how people said it gave them hope. I thought, wow, that I wouldn't have predicted that. So I'm glad I followed my intuition. So I share that only because sometimes your intuition will tell you things that doesn't always seem to make sense. And it can be relevant, even if it's telling you to take a break from activism work. You should listen to that. Also with, being compassionate towards yourself, it will help you be a more effective activist. So, yeah, I think I rambled a bit there, sorry, Judy, but that's kind of my answer to that question around intuition.
Thanks. That's a great answer. And I think we all do experience that sometimes, that feeling we have to just keep going. We can't stop because everything is so urgent. But sometimes, our spirit is telling us, no, you've got to take a break. So can you tell us a little bit more about the article you wrote? It sounds like it was really powerful.
I was writing about how, trauma anyway is a very hard thing to deal with, but I guess specific to witnessing animal cruelty, whether it's someone who's kind of been on the front lines and seen animals getting hurt, or just watching a video like Earthlings or whatever, just acknowledging that it can be difficult as a vegan because veganism isn't the norm. So if you tell people I'm struggling with these images about blah, 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 they might think you're just trying to convert me or I don't want to hear it. So there's that extra level of difficulty with trying to deal with that traumatic impact. I know for me, I was having flashbacks of those images. Afterwards, if I heard the song that was being played during the Earthlings video, I would start crying. It didn't matter where I was in public. I just thought, oh, this isn't good. But yeah, so I think it's really important to get to a place where you recognise it's really disturbing, but you're able to cope with that traumatic impact. So I just had some strategies about it and reaching out for help and support if you feel like you need it, acknowledging that it's actually seeing the positive of it, So like for me, it was probably the worst thing I could have seen, all those images, but also the best thing because it led to me making that decision to go vegan. I'm very grateful for that. So and I think in the article as well, I recommended, if you ever, sometimes some people, they feel like it's ongoing, they might need to see a health professional or counsellor about it, someone who's not in their personal life, who won't judge them about being vegan. So that's what the article was about.
It sounds great. So can we see that on your website, the article?
I don't actually have it posted there, but maybe I will if it's of use. You can probably...
That'd be good.
The title, it was called Coping with Animal-Related Cruelty as a Vegan, I think. I think Lisa posted it on the In Defense of Animals Facebook. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have it on my website.
Okay.
So maybe I should.
Yeah. Lisa could maybe put that in the chat box where it's posted.
It was from a long time ago.
So
yeah.
For the article was? Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good one. So what are some things that each of us could do that, we're not as practiced with intuition maybe, but how could we use our own intuition or how to increase our intuition so that we could be more effective activists and effective taking care of ourselves too, which is part of being an effective activist?
Yeah. I think the first thing, this isn't a strategy so much, is the belief that it's possible. So a lot of people have told me they don't feel like they have intuition. They'll say to me, oh, you were born with the gift of intuition. And I feel like it's a gift because I don't take it for granted, but I believe everyone's born with this gift. And, like if you're human, you're born with blood, you're born with skin, you're born with consciousness. So I feel like everyone has that potential to be intuitive. And if you're already intuitive, there's a potential to make it stronger. So that belief is really important. And that thing of just listening and asking for answers from your intuition. Like, I see intuition as kind of being like a telephone line. You know, it connects you with those answers, whether you believe it's from your inner wisdom or something greater than yourself. We all have that telephone line. So taking time out to tune in and listen. Um, I'm amazed at how many people, when they say they're stuck on something, and I say, what do you feel about it? Or what does your intuition tell you? And they'll say, I don't know. And I'm like, you didn't even give it 10 seconds there. So they'll go, oh, okay. And if they just give it like a minute or two, often the answer will come. It might be a gut feeling, or, you know, just give it time. And I mentioned before that meditation and spiritual practice, for me, I felt like it was kind of, it helped naturally build up my intuition without me even that being my aim or my goal. So if it is your goal, meditation is definitely recommended. I know, you know, we all have hectic lives, but I think the busier you are, the more important it is to meditate. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I was starting a new yoga school, a yoga class, and every time I went, I would agonize over whether I had enough time. So I'd look at the website at what classes were available that day, and there was a quote on there saying, yoga doesn't take time, it gives time. Which was interesting because I thought that's true. Like, if I go to a class, I feel better afterwards. I'm more efficient. I'm more on the ball. I'm alert. I don't have time not to do yoga. And I think it's the same with meditation. And if you want to be intuitive, you kind of need to devote a little bit of your time. We don't have to, but it's highly recommended. If you don't have time, try to carve it in somehow, even if it's just a short amount each day. But yeah, so listening to your intuition, but also I think others can really help on that path. So if you feel something about another person and they're open to you sharing, kind of letting them know what you feel about them and what your intuition's saying. And if you're accurate, it's great validation, like that you're on track, that your intuition's growing. Another thing is, you don't want to make the same mistake I did for years and ignoring your intuition, even when it's strong. Like, follow it. The more you follow it, both in the context of activism, but just your life, it really seems to help build it. I know in my own life, when I've ignored a big intuitive sort of signal, it seems to go offline for a while. Like, it's a muscle. You just have to keep practicing it. So yeah, meditation, following it, listening, asking for answers. Yes.
There we go. Even with little things then, like what to eat, where to go, you know, something you're going to do the next few minutes, it's still a good practice.
I feel it is. I mean, some people would say that's taking it too far. But even, you know, when you're with someone and you feel like you want to blurt something out, it may be in the context of veganism or something completely different. If your intuition's saying no, don't say that. Like, just trust. Or on the contrary, it might be something that you feel, well, that's a bit confronting, but your intuition's telling you to say it in that moment. Just little things, like in a conversation, or you're driving and you feel like, oh, I feel like I should turn left. I always turn right, but I'll just turn left to see where that leads me. It may seem silly to follow those little hits, but for me, I think that's what got me to the stage where I could do something as bold as following that intuitive guidance to quit my job, go over, you know, all of that. It came from the little things, the little decisions. What ice cream flavour to buy? You know, so I don't think anything's too small. But some people may disagree that it's a bit obsessive.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, because I think we all need something like this to help us, especially like what you were talking about, dealing with burnout. When should we stop and take a break, and how long should the break be, and things like that. I think we could really benefit from exercising our intuition. But it sounds like people could call you also to get help with this.
Yeah.
Or email you.
There's a great. Well, I know. I think it's called something else now. They run 30-day, well, this probably isn't relevant for people already vegan, but I know in that Sydney Vegan Club, they offered mentorship and support and help. But yeah, I'm also open to helping people if there's a specific question or, yeah, about how to cope with something related to veganism. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. Well, so is there anything else you want to say before we open up for questions?
I think I'd like to mention just a few people and organisations that have been helpful for me on my journey. The first one would be Steve Pavlina. So he's a personal growth author, speaker, blogger, and I first came across his work. It's ironic because his ex-wife was the woman who actually trained me to be a professional intuitive. But I found out about his work through my brother, who printed out an article on courage that Steve had written. And I remember reading it and just thinking, it struck a chord in me. And I thought, who is this guy? And I checked out his website. He was offering one-on-one coaching at the time. I'd never had coaching before or done anything, especially with someone I had no idea about. But it was just like, again, kind of following my intuition. So on the call with him, I found out he's actually a passionate vegan. He writes a lot of empowering articles about, about being vegan, about dealing with the social aspects of veganism. And he's not particularly pro-religion, but he does have some interesting ideas on spirituality. So I would highly recommend checking that out. That's stevepavlina.com, so STEVEPAVLINA. There's also Marianne Williamson. A lot of people may have heard of her already. She is a spiritual teacher and author. She lectures on A Course in Miracles, and she talks a lot about forgiveness and I guess connecting with others in a caring, loving way, which I think is so important because if you're vegan, you're in the minority. I have heard vegans sometimes talking in a bit of an us and them way, like those meat eaters, us vegans, and I don't feel like that's always helpful in terms of connecting with people. There's a quote Marianne Williamson often refers to by Martin Luther King Jr. about you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So if you are talking to someone and you feel like there is that judgment behind your words, it's just not going to be effective. But I know I don't like being judged. No one really likes it. So just her work on forgiveness and spirituality and following intuition, she calls it the inner voice within as well. And yeah, so Marianne Williamson. And also, if you ever want a break from all this stuff, you need a holiday, you love travel, Veg Voyages is a vegan travel company, so vegvoyages.com. I've been on a few of those. They're amazing. So you get to go. They run adventure tours in Southeast Asia, and you don't have to worry about what's vegan, what's not. They feed you very well. You get to kind of be immersed in the culture. You learn a bit of the language. So I would highly recommend checking out their website, Veg Voyages. Also, everything's included in their package, so they've got the prices on their website, other than flights. And just lastly, Animals Australia is an animal protection organisation. They don't just help animals in Australia, it's all around the world, and I find when I'm feeling a bit like nothing's changing or a bit hopeless, their work is so empowering. They're having such good results in a number of different areas of animal protection. And they have recipes and latest news. So animalsaustralia.org is another one I recommend. But yeah, I just wanted to mention those things because they've been helpful for me.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much, Jess. That was really helpful. Lisa, can we open up for questions now?
Yeah. Sure.
Here you are.
Yeah, this is a great time, and I want to also invite anyone who has a question for Jess. You can ask your question in a few ways. If you're with us on the phone, you can press *4 to unmute yourself. If you're with us on the computer in the webinar, then you can press or click on the microphone icon, and that will open up your speaker so you can chat with us. Also, if you'd like, there is a webcam icon that you can click on. Looks like a camera, and then you'll be able to share your webcam, which is really great. And I just want to let those people know who had their webcam on earlier, you're welcome to turn them back on and just join our conversation. So we do have a couple questions for Jess already, so I'll start with those, and then if anyone else has a question, feel free to chime in. You can certainly just start talking with us and turn on your webcam. That's really the way we do it here. So one of the questions that came up for you, Jess, is what do you say to someone who has seen pigs in a truck outside a slaughterhouse who still eats animals?
So again, I think that's a tough one because if you were to use your logic, rational mind, you might think, okay, well, the best thing would be to kind of point out that inconsistency. If that person, you're assuming that person is disturbed by the pigs in the truck, they might not be. But if they are and they're still eating meat, you might assume, well, I'll point out that to them. But going back to that issue of intuition, it's different for everyone. That person may not be open to hearing that from you. They may feel judged by you. Or on the other hand, you might get intuitive hit. I really feel like I need to say something to them. It might make a huge difference. So I don't feel like there is a black and white rule about it. I know I actually come from a family of hunters. On my mum's side, her brothers and her father used to hunt. My husband comes from a family who enjoys hunting. And most of my friends and family, they're not vegan. So if I were to tell everyone what I thought about, I know a lot of my family love animals. If I were to point out inconsistencies to everyone, I'd have no friends and my family wouldn't want to see me. So it's about what you're led to, like asking in that moment, if you have the opportunity, if that person's a friend. I'm not sure the context, if you know that person or if it's just someone close to you or an acquaintance. But it kind of depends on all those things. It's the context, how asking your intuition, what do I say now? Do I say nothing? So it goes back to that. So I'm sorry that's not kind of a direct answer of what to say, but I really don't think there ever is a black and white answer for every situation. Even for someone in that same situation of seeing pigs in a truck, maybe even being disturbed by that and continuing to eat meat, yeah, it might be that you recommend a certain book or video. It might not be that it's your place to talk about it to them, or it might be. So it's just, about following your guidance around that, and trusting not everyone's on the same journey, and it might be that they make changes soon or later, or they might not ever, but it's not your responsibility if they don't want to hear what you have to say. You're not feeling offended by that necessarily, because it's about them, not you in that situation, so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that really tough question that so many of us experience,
Yeah.
because we have friends and family members and people that we know who have those inconsistencies, and like you said, logic isn't always the way to open up their hearts. And we do have another question.
Yeah.
This one is from Elisa. The other one was from Sarah. And she's asking if you find that live, raw vegan foods help to increase intuition.
I actually think it does. I'm not a raw foodist, but I've noticed I know you've probably heard of Victoria Boutenko, the Green Smoothie Revolution author. I started eating more raw foods when I read her stuff, and green smoothies, I feel like they've changed my life. So just on an energetic level, I feel like I'm not the same if I haven't had my green smoothie. I have a liter every morning, so some would call me crazy. But yeah, I find I don't know if it has to be raw food, but I know personally when I eat more raw food, I feel like I'm more switched on, more energetic. That helps with my intuition as well. Um, but yeah, having said that, I know a lot of people who don't eat raw and they're very psychic. They do great readings. There are um, different types of food for everyone. But yeah, I would recommend if you haven't tried raw foods, green smoothies especially, to give it a go and just see how, because when I first became vegan, I was more of a junk food vegan, I have to admit, because I'd eaten so much meat and dairy growing up. That was normal for me, burgers, fries. So when I switched, I was like, veggie burgers, veggie fries. And it was when I started eating more healthily that I noticed my intuition was getting better. It was interesting because I think the same year I went vegan, I also I noticed my intuitive ability increasing a lot. I never really put the two and two together. Maybe it was a coincidence, but yeah. So I agree that live foods may help with that.
Well, that's very
Actually,
inspiring.
oh, I was just going to say on Steve Pavlina's website, I think he has a whole section on being raw and being raw vegan and how that has really helped. He didn't stick with it, but when he was doing that, he was a lot more psychic and to the point where he thought it was a bit crazy, So if he ever wants a boost in intuition, he will go raw. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Wow, that is very interesting. I've had questions similar to that, like maybe not about being raw, but about being vegan, if that does help one's intuitive abilities, and it sounds like there's possibly a connection.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I'm just
Maybe not
checking.
junk food vegan. I think that helps me. Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
something to think about. So perhaps like a
Mm.
whole foods, plant-based and live as well, if that's a preference of yours or of anyone's. Um, so I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions. Just to let you know, if you're with us on Facebook Live, you're welcome to ask a question too. We can find those and ask Jess. And anybody else who's with us on the webinar, feel free to chime in, to ask a question. And I'm just wondering, Jess, do you have any questions that people tend to ask you? Is something that you hear a lot?
You mean in regards to being vegan or being intuitive?
I think a combo of both, if you
Yeah.
have those sorts of questions.
Um, I don't usually get asked about both in the same sort of question. I think both those things, it's interesting, both those things are very important to me, and yet they're also two things that I've felt I've been a little bit hidden about at times, like not quite comfortable sharing, especially in the beginning when I was first doing intuitive readings, when I was first vegan. I wasn't comfortable sharing those things. So if people ask me why are you doing readings or why are you vegan, and usually not again not in the same by the same person or in the same question, but um, yeah, and I just found there was this common thread with both where it's about, I think it's about intuition too, but following your own truth. And if people ask me why, and I did say before that I often say, oh, because I watch Earthlings, but I think it's deeper than that. It's about being true to yourself. I remember there's a great quote in the Conversations with God trilogy, if you've read those books. I think he uses a quote from Shakespeare about "To thine own self be true." I can't remember the exact quote, but it's around, you're more honest with other people when you're honest with yourself. And if people ask me, why are you doing readings or why are you vegan? It's like, it just feels true for me. It's not really about, like often people think it's a deprivation or you must have amazing willpower. Well, for me, it's not willpower. I just want it. Like this is important. There's also a quote in Conversation with God about betrayal of yourself in order not to betray another is betrayal nonetheless. It's the highest betrayal. So to me, that's a wonderful summary of, if someone asks you the same sort of question, like, why are you vegan and what's wrong with you? Or especially if it's kind of a negative sort of energy behind it, you can just answer like that. You don't, I think in the beginning I felt like I needed to know all the facts and know everything about what was going, because I didn't retain all that information. It was disturbing. I didn't necessarily want to remember everything. A lot of the times people still say to me, well, I think cows like it when they're milked. It's like, so when people ask those things, you can just simply say, it feels right for me. You don't have to get into needless arguments if you feel like it's a waste of your energy and you don't want to go there and it's personal. So I think I went off on a tangent there, Lisa. Sorry. But yeah.
No, that's okay. I think it's a good illustration of what happens when these questions come up about veganism. And I'm going to actually ask you one that I've heard before, where people will ask, how can someone be spiritual, a spiritual
Mm.
person, and not be vegan and not make that connection? So I noticed, and that's actually part of why we started this group, Vegan Spirituality, is because several of the initial members, and I think Sandy Herman is with us online watching us live, and she's really the gal who came up with the name. She coined the term vegan spirituality. So we're really so grateful to her. And this idea of when you're in spiritual communities, whether they're like a women's moon circle or a group that is joining together to explore energy and raising the energy vibration, and yet those same people would be wearing fur coats or possibly having a barbecue of animal flesh after the event. So there's that incongruity within the spiritual community. And as a spiritual healer or intuitive, how do you navigate that with your fellow intuitives?
Yeah, I think in a way it comes back to remembering how I was back when I first had the information. And I kind of think I was very engaged in spirituality back then, and I wasn't vegan. So I think it's good to remember when we weren't, as some of us were raised vegan and have been vegan their whole lives, that wasn't the case for me. So I kind of identify with people who are still engaged in spiritual practices, but they're not necessarily vegan. And some people are very spiritual, very connected, uh, very psychic, very helpful, great healing ability. And yeah, they're not all vegan. And I think it kind of comes down to that thing about it's the norm. You know, we're sort of in this culture, we're in this world where it's not normal to be vegan. So even though I absolutely agree that if you're talking about oneness and compassion and love and yet supporting a very violent industry, it kind of doesn't make sense on one level. But I remember that it took me years to get to the place where I decided to be vegan. So I feel like I can't judge, you know, and the fact is everyone's on their journey. I think it's changing, so more and more people are becoming aware of vegan lifestyle and it's becoming more mainstream, definitely more so than when I first did the 30-day vegan challenge. But I think it will change, like over time, those spiritual, you know, if we are talking about being one and being true to ourselves, like having to ask ourselves, does this fit in with my values? And for some people, I know they've said they've tried a vegan diet and they felt like, you know, their doctor told them to eat meat, or they felt like for personal reasons they couldn't stick to it. And I think things are changing where more and more doctors are coming out saying veganism can be healthy and is healthy, and maybe more so than the old sort of recommended diet. And so those people who maybe wanted to be vegan for spiritual reasons but felt like personally they couldn't, I think that will change as the world changes and as more information is out there about becoming vegan. So yeah, I think it's possible. It is kind of a conflict when you're, yeah, I understand that, but I think things are changing and there's reason to be hopeful.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you for answering that question because it helps me to have a broader perspective. So I always thought, how is that possible when someone has those special abilities? But of course, even people with special abilities are also people just like the rest of us and part of our society and culture, and it may not be something that they have thought of. I know that I've worked with lots of animal communicators. We've done this blessing of the animal ceremony for many years, and it was a challenge for me to find one that didn't eat the animals as well. But over time, I've also noticed I've found more and more vegan animal communicators. So that's also just helped the understanding for me. And
I mean, back in when I became vegan, I know when I'd go to a restaurant, people didn't know what vegan meant. Like I would ask the waitress, "Do you have anything? Can anything be made vegan?" Like, vegan? What's vegan? But now everyone knows what it means. I went to Europe recently, and there was I couldn't read obviously the different languages, but they would have a vegan tick on a lot of things. Like in Italy and France, that had the vegan friendly symbol, which was awesome. Like that just was not there 10 years ago. So I think things will continue to change as time goes on, as we become more aware and we know that vegan food can be yummy and tasty and good for us as well.
Yes, that's very, very encouraging. We have another question here. This is from Elisa, and she asks, have you had to navigate those who feel that the use of plastics and synthetics made from petrochemicals is a huge issue that it seems vegans are promoting? And also, like, for example, petrochemical production that's polluting not only the animals and the plants, but also the human germ cell. So these are just some thoughts that Elisa was sharing with us. So
yeah, I've actually never come across that before. So I've had a lot of arguments thrown my way and a lot of things about various issues and why you shouldn't be vegan, or even, you know, plants feel pain, all of that. But I've never had the synthetic plastic issue raised with me. So I don't know if there's a specific context or question around that. I'm happy to answer. But personally, I can't say I've ever had that question raised with me before.
Yeah, that's a new one, and probably we'll be getting more and more of that because there's something, there's actually a group on Facebook called Zero Waste Vegans. There's a lot of
Oh,
zero
yeah.
waste discussion going on, and so just wanted to, maybe it's part of that.
So I
Yeah.
just unmuted myself, so
Yeah,
maybe I could
please.
chime in.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, please do.
so I've kind of taken a really deep dive into veganism and raw living foodism on and off for the past 7 years. And back to that other question, I have definitely found that when I'm high raw, my intuition goes so deep that I need to go back to some cooked foods because I can't handle myself.
Too much.
But
Yes.
but the thing about the petrochemicals that I'm really concerned about, because I think there's a distinction between vegan and plant-based, right? Because at least in what I've learned, and that I'm realizing now that those that call themselves vegan do not use animal products, but do not have any context around what's replacing those animal products. And I'm so interested in the use of hemp and linen and cotton that's not sprayed, but I'm really, really concerned about the use of plastics and synthetics and people really almost, I don't want to be negative, but just almost bragging about how they're not wearing leather or whatever the animal product is, but they're wearing synthetics, which are basically killing us right now where I live, where the petrochemical industry is at its peak. And so I just wanted to put this out because you seem so brilliant. It's been a pleasure listening to you. I've really enjoyed hearing your story because there's overlap with so many of us, I'm sure. But I just wanted, I don't know, I guess, and I have to admit it. I wrote this in the blog, the box. I actually asked the questions I asked because I'm asking people to consider these things because I've been so immersed in it for so long that I'm like exploding at the seams. And so thank you for taking the questions and going off on all your tangents. I'll be quiet
now. But I guess on the synthetic issue, and I suppose I think we're all human, and making the shift to a vegan lifestyle can seem so huge for someone. So I think if they were to consider everything, every possible thing straight away, you know, and they've decided, okay, I'm not going to wear leather. And then if it was to be raised, well, you shouldn't be wearing synthetic shoes either. We don't want to overwhelm people so they feel like, well, I'm just going to lose. I may as well wear leather then, you know, like, or I may as well eat meat. If there's this, I think, pressure when you're vegan, people sometimes, I guess, really, what's the word? It kind of highlights things when something's inconsistent. People will point it out, like, I know at school there were vegetarians who wore leather shoes, and people were very, like, meat eaters would be very angry about that. Like, why are you judging us for eating meat and you're wearing leather shoes? But I think we're all on a journey. We're doing the best we can. It can be a process, and it can be good to raise issues. Like, I know when I went vegetarian, I didn't even consider the fact I was wearing leather shoes. So it was actually helpful for that to be raised to me, not in a judgmental way, but just that's made from animals too. Like, oh, I don't know why that hadn't occurred to me. So with the synthetic thing, it may be that it hasn't occurred to people. And if it's something you're passionate about or that you're concerned about, especially how it affects your community, maybe raising it in a way that you said sometimes it feels like you're coming from a negative space. So yeah, meditating first, doing what you can to come from a more empowered space. So because I think I mentioned before, when I first became vegan, I kind of was a bit angry. That doesn't help. It doesn't help the cause. So coming from a place where you feel like you want to let people know but not necessarily judge them can be really powerful. And giving them an alternative. Like, you don't want people saying, well, I can't wear fur and I can't wear leather and I can't wear synthetics either. What am I supposed to wear? I'm not going to go around naked, So you want to put out those other options. So yeah, I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that is helpful to provide those options. That's a great strategy.
Mm.
It really is. And also we're all on a journey. We're learning. We brought this person, Miles Lewis, who was talking about a zero waste vegan, to join our sustainable activism webinar and also our vegan spirituality group, just to let us know what are some other ways that we can, when we buy our vegetables, we want to bring them home, but not in plastic. What are other ways? And so we're all learning too. We are all learning for sure.
Yeah. And again, things are shifting. I know in Australia, they've shifted this year, or maybe it was late last year. So Coles and Woolworths, the big kind of supermarkets, they no longer automatically put things in plastic bags. So you have to bring your own bag. That was just unheard of a year or two ago. So things are shifting, I think, in a more kind of conscious, environmentally friendly way, which is awesome.
Yes, yes. And thank you for reminding us of those things. I feel like that's been such a theme of this discussion with you, is really reminding us about this journey that we're on, and that it's really becoming a more vegan-friendly world day by day. That's the feeling I have, is just, oh, yes, it's happening. It's happening in its own time. And so many of us sometimes feel really impatient, and I wonder what would be a suggestion of how to manage that feeling of frustration and impatience, that it's just not happening right away. Because once we learn and see these movies like Earthlings and other Dominion, other movies, then suddenly we're aware, and then how to kind of bridge the gap between our awareness and the current culture.
Yeah, I think the first thing is about just recognizing, like, I can't save the planet on my own. Like, just reducing that risk of burnout. I can't do it all on my own. I can't go out there and tell everyone to be vegan. They're just going to think you're a nut job. And, so it's about, I think, just being strong in yourself. Like, again, going back to, I know I'm probably repeating this thing about trusting your intuition. What do I do next? Where can I help? What can I do? It might be, and the other thing is, when you're really strong in yourself and you're living in accordance with your truth, and you're engaging in self-care, so you're generally happy and positive. Not that, we're pretending everything's all rosy. So you're not in denial, but doing what you can to be healthy psychologically and physically. People will be drawn to that. So I feel like you'll end up helping people sometimes without even trying. I've been told by people that they're inspired to try being vegan for a little bit because they saw what I was eating, and they said, I feel like you're inspiring. And I had no intention of doing that. I wasn't trying to do that. And on the other hand, there have been people in my life, especially at the beginning, when I wanted to save the planet, where I did try. I wanted to inform them and tell them, you love animals so much. That didn't work. Like, it wasn't effective. So I think it's about recognizing what's effective versus what you think should be done. Like, you might think the planet should change overnight, but recognizing it probably won't, and doing what you can one step at a time, one person at a time, being that person who you wish you had crossed your path years ago to help you, inspire you. You being that person, I think, is one of the best things you can do, rather than like always thinking externally, how can I change the world? How can I fix them? Because that has a bit of a judgmental flavor to it as well. I need to fix what they're doing wrong. Being strong in yourself will kind of, I think it's more effective than burning yourself out and trying to save the planet, if that makes sense.
That does, and that's a big part of our sustainable activism campaign, is really to encourage people to support people who want to save the world, but also to save themselves by taking care of themselves along the way, so that we can all continue doing that.
Yeah. And kind of asking your intuition, what will fuel me as opposed to what will drain me? Because if you're burnt out, you can't help anyone. That compassion needs to be directed to yourself as well, because then you can do the best work that way.
Oh, that is lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that piece of wisdom that I think we all can take to heart. I'm wondering, I'm noticing that we're getting towards the end of our interview, and I know that we have spoken with you about possibly doing a closing reading with us tonight, and so I'm really looking forward to that. Definitely want to give you a few moments to do that.
Okay. And I did mention this to you, Lisa and Judy, but I just wanted to share that when I was first asked to do a closing segment, I remember thinking, I don't know what to do, but I emailed and said yes. Within minutes of typing that email, I went to the local post office and received a parcel. It was actually the proof copy of my new book, so just a bit of shameless self-promotion. my new book will be released very soon. But I actually, I flicked to a page and I thought, wow, that would be really relevant to this whole idea of surrendering to our intuition or something greater than ourselves and helping animals and people at the same time. So I just wanted to read this thing I wrote. It was about, I mentioned Animals Australia before, that animal protection, the campaign director for Animals Australia. She's called Lynn White. She's like one of my heroes. But she was talking about her previous career as a police officer and feeling like she was frustrated. She felt like there was something else she should be doing with her life. She was just putting out fires, dealing with these domestic violence situations and not feeling like she was making an impact. So she, anyway, I'll read what she said because I think it's relevant to all of us. So I'll never forget one particular Sunday in my life. It was a beautiful day, a cloudless blue sky, towering gum trees and not a soul around. But I felt so at odds with myself because I didn't know what I should be doing with my life. In absolute frustration and at no one in particular, I said out loud, please grant me the opportunities to serve. I won't let you down. Yes, I admit I was talking to the trees, but in my defence, it was my first time. I was desperate, and don't knock it until you try it. From the moment that I uttered that plea and made a conscious decision that I wanted to live a life of service, it was like being thrown into some sort of evolutionary current. Doors opened and my pathway emerged, along with the people and even the animals that I needed to help me on that journey. You know, I hadn't seen any evidence of a mysterious force at work in this universe in all of those years that I sat as a child in that church, but I've seen it on so many occasions since that day, at work in my life and in the lives of my colleagues. So, just super quickly, I'd like to invite you just to either close your eyes or look downwards if that's more comfortable, and just going within to that space where you feel like you can ask a similar question to that, like how can I serve? What's the next step? And I find what's the next step is often a lot less overwhelming than something big like what's my purpose, or something just easy. What's the next step? How can I best use my strengths, my talents, my knowledge? How can I best use that to live the most fulfilling life possible and at the same time help others as much as I can? So just being open to whatever answer comes through. Might change from day to day or week to week, and it might be that the answer comes through a few hours from now or days, but just coming back to this space when you can, just offering, kind of surrendering your own personal agenda of what you think should be done, and just asking that inner wisdom or whatever you believe in, you know, what can I do next to best help? And when you're ready, just coming back and opening your eyes.
Well, that was lovely, Jess, and it's such an important question to ponder. I think it's really important for each of us so that we feel as though we're walking our path and speaking our truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So that's another bit of wisdom that I think I gained from this webinar is just that to be around you, because you are like really living and breathing yourself. You know, you are being your full self in your choices.
Yeah.
And I think that's just by being ourselves is another great advocacy tool. It's when we hide who we really are, you know, that our light kind of dims. But when we're just being ourselves, people around us might be gravitating towards that positive energy and that energy of being in alignment with our body, mind, and spirit.
And I think that's because I've been through that journey of really worrying about what people think and not being true to myself. So because I've gone through that, I think I really know the difference. I can feel it when I'm trying to hide or not be true to myself. And I try as much as I can. I don't always succeed, but I try. So, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Sharing your thoughts and also just really being authentic in your responses. And it's been a real delight. really.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd like to just encourage everyone who's with us to check out some of our Activist Month activities. Those are at idausa.org/activist month. And we even have an activist love poem for you. And today's Valentine's Day. So if there's any other day that you're going to check out the poem, today is the day. So if you go to that link, it's a wonderful video recital of this great poem by an activist named Sean Hill. So do that as your special treat. And also be sure to ask yourself that question that Jess invited us to ask when you have a moment on your own, and maybe even do some personal reflection and journaling about it. So I'd like to thank Judy for co-hosting and Jess for being with us tonight, and everyone else who's listening or watching the replay or joined us on Facebook Live. It's really a delight. So please tune in. We do this every month. This is our opportunity to gather together and really explore veganism as a spiritual practice. So thanks to everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Enjoy this rest of this Valentine's Day and give yourself a big hug and lots of love, because we're all part of the same vegan tribe. So thank you to each and every one of you. Have a wonderful
Thanks,
evening, everyone.
everybody.
Good night.
Vegan hugs.
Vegan hugs.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.